Hello, my name is Corey Yoder of Coriander Quilts. I'm excited to be in the Fat Quarter Shop studio today, showing you guys how to make a super cute tiny house pincushion. Now I've got a couple little samples up here, but the one that we're going to be making is this little guy right here. And it's the same little house that I have used in my patchwork magnets pattern, which is actually where I got the patterns for all of the other little pincushions that you see here. These pincushions use Sugar Creek prints and wovens. And I liked this little house so much when I made the magnet pattern that I decided to make it into a little mini quilt. So this is my mini neighborhood pattern, the same house, but a whole bunch of houses. So you have a whole neighborhood of little mini houses. And we are going to learn how to make just one. All right, we're back to talk supplies for the tiny house pincushion. I've got them all laid out here for you. You may have scraps on hand that you want to use for this project. It takes just teeny little pieces because it's a small little guy. I actually pulled some charm squares from a Sugar Creek mini charm pack. So if you have mini charm packs hanging around that you're not quite sure what to do, you can make quite a number of these little pincushions without using too many mini charm squares. So I pulled some fabrics from a mini charm pack. You are also going to need some kind of filling. For mine, I'm using the Poly-fil. You could also use crushed walnuts. I filled some of my pincushions that you see here with the walnuts and some with the Poly-fil, so whichever you prefer is awesome. Either one works great. For the threads, I machine quilted some of my pincushions and I hand quilted some of my pincushions. This is another great time to try your hand at hand quilting because they're little projects and you can see what you think without being committed to a large project. If you are hand quilting, you're going to need a variety of hand quilting threads in whatever color match your fabrics that you've chosen. I'm using Aurifil 12 weight threads. If you are machine quilting, I like to just use whatever I have in my machine for piecing, which is usually an Aurifil 50 weight. I often use the color 2021, which is kind of a warm white color. Additionally, you're going to need a little square of batting. My little square of batting is 3 inches. It just needs to be a little bit more than 2.5 inches around the whole perimeter. So 3.5, something like that is going to work really well for you. For poking out the corners before I flip my pincushion, I like to use this Alex Anderson tool. This point on this edge here works really well. I've used like a scissors or something a little bit pointier, and I have already just poked right out the corner of my pincushion. So this works really great not to poke right out the side of your pincushion. And then just a cute little scissors. Now I want to talk about the measurements of the pieces that you're going to need for your little house pincushion. For the back of your pincushion, one of the 2.5 inch squares from the mini charm pack works perfectly. That's the size you need and it's already cut for you, so that's what I used for that. This little piece here is the roof of your tiny house, and for that you need 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And then you are going to need the actual house part. I'm using this little print here, and that is a 1.5 by 1.5 inch square. That's just this little part here of your house, so that little part there, and then your roof piece is that one there. And then your background fabrics, I'm using a white tonal print from Sugar Creek for my background. You are going to need 2 1 inch by 1.5 inch pieces. That is for either side of the actual house part of the pincushion. And then you need 2 squares that are 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. That's these here. And you're going to be using that for the sides of the roof part of your house. So once you have gathered all of your supplies, meet me back here and we will piece our little tiny house pincushion together. All right, I am back. I have pieced my little house. It's just a tiny little fella. He is only 2.5 inches square, so it's just a little guy. I pieced him together. You will find piecing instructions in either the mini neighborhood pattern or the patchwork magnets pattern. Both of those have this same exact house used in there. He was just too cute to do just one pattern. So there's 2 different ones you can choose from. I've got him pieced, and now the next thing that I will want to do is add a little bit of machine quilting. And For making pincushions, I usually will just use a thin layer of batting. This is the Happy Cloud 80/20 batting that I'm using. And I don't put any backing onto this. I opt just for the batting layer. So we're gonna take this over to the machine and I am gonna do just a little bit of machine quilting. I don't even spray baste or pin or anything. On something this small, I find that it just kind of sticks in place. So we'll just go over and stitch this down. So I am just going to line up the edge of my foot with the seam, and I'm just going to run a straight stitch around the entire house just to secure it in place. If you wanted to do this by hand, you could, but I am just going to do it here. I don't even need to back stitch there because that's going to get sewn over when we attach the backing. And it's about a 1/4 inch away, so I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch away from the seam over here. So I'm going to stop when I get about a 1/4 inch from the next seam and pivot. I want my foot just to run right along that seam there. If you find a spot on your foot where you can kind of line things up, it works so nicely. So out here, I'm going to stop there and pivot. And I'm going to go a little bit further. Sometimes I will pivot around just a little bit to see if I'm where I want to be, and sometimes I'll take a couple more stitches just so I can get that angle right. There, I want this lining up with the roof of my house. So now that it does, now I'll just keep on going. And I'll do the same thing when I get up here. Just go a little bit further here. I'm actually out just in the batting. And then pivot him around, line up the edge of my foot with the roof, and then just come on down. Same with this one, go a little bit further. And I can even take it a little bit more. Sometimes it's hard to eyeball exactly where you need to stop and start, so feel free to go back and forth a little bit till you get it where you want it to be. Right there. And come on down. And that's really all the quilting that I'm going to add on here. You don't really need to add a lot of quilting, so just a little bit around the perimeter just to kind of stabilize everything. We will go back over to the cutting table. I'm going to trim this up, and then we are going to add the back of our pincushion. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is trim this up. I have a 3.5 inch square ruler right here. I used to think it was a good idea if you have like a 2.5 inch and you're trimming to 2.5 inches square, like use a 2.5 inch square ruler. It's a bad idea. It's very hard to keep it all nice and tidy and go around the whole perimeter. So opt for something a little bit bigger. This is 3.5 inches square. So you can line up 2 sides at once and just trim off. Now I use a 60mm ruler cutter even when I am doing small things. I've tried to use those little ones and it seems like such a good idea, but I always end up coming back to my bigger rotary cutter. So you'll see me almost always reaching for the big cutters. So we have him trimmed up, and now we're ready to add our backing. So this is the back of the pincushion, this 2.5 inch square. We're gonna layer these right sides together. We're gonna go over to the machine and we are going to stitch around a 1/4 inch around the perimeter, leaving a nice sized gap that we are going to then turn our pincushion through. So let's go do that. Okay, so I am back. The first thing that we wanna do after we have stitched around the perimeter is trim our corners out, just so that we can have nice crisp corners. So I'm just gonna take all of these little corners off here. Don't cut into your seam allowance, but we're just taking off some of that pointiness there so we can turn those out nicer. And then we're gonna turn this out. This is probably the hardest part of the whole project, is turning this silly little thing out. If you've left yourself enough room, it's gonna turn out nicer. Sometimes I think, well, I just want to sew it a little closer so I don't have to do so much hand stitching at the end. But believe me, the hand stitching can actually go faster than fussing turning this out if you don't give yourself enough room. So he's turning out nicely. I gave myself, as you saw, pretty much space from corner to corner, so it's turning out well. Once I get it turned out as much as I can with my fingers here, then I like to go back in with the Alex Anderson tool. And this is a nice blunt edge, and I just poke my corners out there and get it all nice and tidy. They usually poke out pretty nicely. I do this on all corners. these last ones that are closest to your opening are going to be the ones you'll have to think about the most. Once you have your corners poked out, I like to take this over to my ironing board and I fold those in the 1/4 inch that I'm going to need and just give that a nice press. And then it is ready to be stuffed. So let's go ahead and stuff it. You've ironed it and it's all nice and tidy. Now we'll just stuff it. So this is just Poly-fil. And this always takes more than you think it's going to take. So I'm going to take a pretty good handful of it here and you just start working it down. If you have kids at home like I do, sometimes this is a job that they love doing. So if stuffing isn't your favorite activity, you can hit up your 10-year-old daughter and see if maybe she'll stuff your pincushion for you. If not, you can stuff it yourself. I'm just stuffing it in here. And I do like a nice, firm little stuffed pincushion. So I tend to really poke it on in there and grab more as I need it. So you just keep stuffing it. I do like to stop every now and then and double check and make sure that when I fold my 1/4 inch in, when I pinch it together, that there's still room down in there. So there is. So I would take a little bit more here and keep going. If you are stuffing with walnut shells, I like to use a little funnel to put those in. So if that's your method that you like to use, a funnel works great. And I think I can put even a little more of the fluff in there. We call it fluff at my house. I don't know if that's what you guys call it. Poly-fil, I suppose, is the more proper name, but if I ask the girls to go get me fluff, they know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's probably about as full as I would want, and I might have even gone a little bit aggressively there with my fluff. But as long as you can get your 1/4 inches to fold down in there, and if you have to take a little bit out so that you can hand stitch that shut nicely, you're just going to close that up, stitch it. I just use the Poly-fil 50 weight to stitch that shut, and we end up with a super cute little pincushion ready to go.